Good morning. Welcome to Capital Planning Committee, Monday, May 4th, 7:30 a.m. All members are present. Just going to read our short statement pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting, the Southborough Capital Planning Committee, will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information, the guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right. With that, I'll officially call us to order and move to item 2 on our agenda, approval of meeting minutes from April 27th, 2020. Are there any comments or questions for Jeff? Seeing none, I'll move that we accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Joe. Any further conversation? All right, roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Okay.
Palmer, aye.
Pfaff, aye.
Hark, aye.
Russia abstain.
Okay. 501. Next item is chairman's update. This is just a placeholder I'm going to have for all future meetings on any conversations that occur, between meetings that I think that the committee is to be aware of. I think the important one is an update from last week's meeting. Is one of our to-dos when talking with the facilities director was about the senior center and the availability of Assevit, which is obviously the school that was going to be undertaking a lot of that work if the funding had been approved at town meeting. Their availability at the earliest at this point is the fall of 2021. So any funding that would be needed for that project, if the town was in favor of moving forward with it, is likely going to be a next fiscal year item. And I think that will be relevant for when we get into the review of FY21 capital requests at the end of the meeting. But I figured it was more important to get that out there now as part of kind of a follow-up from last meeting. So Mark did talk to the school, and we did make sure that the Council on Aging chair and Senior Center Director are also aware. Any questions on that? All right, so I think for purpose of this conversation, I'm just going to move both Chief Paulus and Chief Achilles in. We are going to start with police, but just give me a second to move them in. All right, Chief Paulus, you should be in. Chief Achilles, you should be in. All right, you're both on mute with no video. Bottom left, you should see some buttons. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Morning. Morning.
Morning, guys. How are you?
Morning.
So the way we have this structured on our agenda this morning is we'll have Chief Paulus talk about his capital needs first. Then we'll talk combined between the two chiefs about the radio infrastructure. And then we'll move on to Chief Achilles for the fire capital plan. So I guess, Chief Paulus, I know you had submitted a memo for that outlined kind of what had gone into your request for the current fiscal year. I guess the upcoming fiscal year, so FY21. I don't know if you wanted to talk through that, the Taser program, so the vehicle, the Taser program, and then maybe in more specific terms, just how you determine when to replace your cruisers, how you come to the decision of 1 per year, 2 per year, et cetera. If that would probably be a good helpful primer for the committee to ask you some questions.
Sure. So kind of like a presentation I put forth last January, a year ago January, when looking for cruises. So anyway, I keep the top usually 5 to 6 that are in patrol every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We keep them under 100,000 miles. When they get around 100,000 miles, we move them up the line for admin cars. That would be the detective, and then cars, the lieutenant, and then cars that are used for court duty or details. And then we keep 12 total in the fleet right now. So when those cars that move up to the admin side of it, when those get to be shot 120, 130,000 miles, they're ready to be retired, because basically they start costing a fortune to repair. So we'll get new cruisers to move them up the line. So you'll see for this year, I put in, it says a chief's vehicle. My vehicle runs great. It's a civilian version of the police Ford Explorer. The detective's car, which is the old chief's car, that's how we usually move that up the line. His car is shot, it's ready to be retired. So I'll get a new vehicle and then move mine up the line to him. Obviously, the detective vehicle is out there, 5, 6 days a week when he's working. Not a lot of mileage on it though, so moving my car up the line takes care of that for this year. Just to look forward, probably next year we're going to need to replace 2 of the frontline cars. So I'd be looking at 2 cruisers in next year's capital. But for this year, like I said, just replacing my car and passing it up to the detective. We'll just start with that. If you want any discussion.
Any questions from the committee?
So how many cruisers are we looking to average a year?
It's either 1 or 2 per year, depending on the mileage.
Okay, so that accounts for the 2 different expenditures in alternate years?
Yeah, I don't know how it goes. Some years the mileage might work out right, where we only need 1. Some years only need 2. Some years, like this year, I'm able to replace the detective's car. We don't need any marked police vehicles.
Okay.
And that's usually, there can be a lot of factors in that. So say we could have a cruiser that gets in a serious accident and it takes months to fix, so the mileage is down. Various other things. Sometimes you can't get them from the supplier, so you might need a car July 1st. Usually the trend has been that we'll only get these cars in October, but lately the trend has been we haven't gotten them till December or January, which will throw the mileage off for the following year. So usually when capital time comes, like around September, I'm able to estimate it better whether we'll need 1 or 2. But a year from now, it's looking, like we'll need 2.
And Chief, I guess maybe, just so we have it for the future, I think it would probably be helpful if you list out all of the vehicles you have in your fleet and, kind of what years they are and what if mileage goes perfectly, no accidents, no nothing, when you think those will fall, on the docket. Because I think one of the things this year may be, at least my personal view, is maybe a little deceiving, is obviously your car is, like you said, a civilian car. So the cost to equip it is just a lot less, I assume, than a typical patrol car that you would have with all the equipment that's needed inside of it. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, very much so. So my car, to equip it and then pass it on down the line, as you see, it's somewhere around 39,000. For a patrol car right now, it keeps going up and up. It's closer to 58 to 60 to fully equip a mock patrol vehicle on the cruiser line.
Any other questions on vehicles for the chief? Chief, just want to quickly touch on the Taser item, just so everyone's aware of it, because we are going to be voting to support the requests or make recommendations on the request today.
Yeah, you'll see at the beginning of the year, the replacement for the Glock pistols, sat down with Mark Purple, and we had Harvard money, so we took the Glocks off the list. That's a every 10-year replacement item for our duty pistols. So we bought that with Harvard money. Since we brought the Taser program on, it's a lease program. So we have put that in the capital budget for the last, I think, 5 years. I know there is some discussion of moving that to a line item. That's up to the board. I haven't heard anything back on that.
But it would be a once every, how many years did you say?
It's every year, it's recurring.
Okay. So it's like an ongoing expense as opposed to a one-off expense like the pistols.
Yeah, and it's, we looked at doing like a one-time expense, like a capital, but these things have to be replaced every 5 years too. This is actually a good program because it comes with a full warranty. So yeah, it's just what the town's choice is on making it a budget line item or a capital line item.
Okay. Mark or Brian, on that, given that it's a recurring item, sounds like, at least to me, it makes a lot of sense given the benefits the chief has outlined. Is there any reason it is in the capital program?
No, not in particular. I think this is one of the items that we're probably gonna move to the operating budget.
Can I interject?
Go ahead, Kathy.
So remember, we've kind of got two capital budgets, which is always confusing to people. They don't do this a lot. So we've got ones that we consider truly capital, long-term, non-recurring. And that's the lion's share. But then we've got the other that we do consider operating capital that are part of the budgets of the various departments, and this is one of those. So there's several things that are in that category. The cars, because they're going to be replaced every few years. So I'm not sure it needs to be moved to the operating budget. Other than, I mean, I think it's in the right place as far as where it is. But more importantly, so Chief, it's really nice to see your face, by the way. So I know that you took the Glocks and put those over to the Harbor Bookstore donation account. Is there not room to put the tasers in there this year too?
Yeah, I don't believe there's any room. We've been using a lot of that money for some of the radio upgrades as we move forward. So that money's kind of disappearing quick.
And see, that's what I wish we wouldn't do. I wish we would put everything out and decide what needs to be done and then decide how to pay for it. So it worries me that I hear that the radio stuff is being paid through that, because, you know, I've got a concern that we are not approaching the radios holistically and really looking at what we should do and doing things piecemeal and making mistakes. Okay, but enough said about that. I agree we need the tasers. I just was hoping they could pay for those like you did Glocks through the bookstore account. And I haven't looked at it in the last couple of months. I don't know what's in it. It sounds like you
I know some of the, we'll talk more about the final radio upgrades, but some of these were for upgrades to the antennas that really couldn't wait for the year process to go through, you know, through capital. They kind of popped up and they needed to be done now. So I think that's
okay.
That's kind of why we went with the, you know, the Harvard money. Correct, Chief?
That's correct.
Okay.
And Kathy, maybe to your point on the tasers, and I think it's something that Mark and Brian should come back to us on, but if we were to take your view on the tasers and having them in the capital program every year, then we need to go back and revisit what Tom's doing on IT, right? They're buying X number of computers a year. Those are 5-year type assets. We need to be careful we need to be consistent. So I guess what I would ask is a consistent application of whatever, whether it's a policy or just recommendations of how this goes, I think we need to be consistent between departments in terms of how this gets applied.
You're right, there is a lot of inconsistency. For example, we're gonna look at a couple of things in a second, the things that clearly belong in an operating budget. Tree trimming, there's several things. So years ago, advisory tried to tighten up the definition of what a capital expense was, and we did. We changed the definition of the bylaw was changed, but it probably should be looked at again. For the accountants in the group, to me, a capital is something that is long-lived and adds value, and it's not something that is recurring. So we may want to look at that definition again and try to truly have what's capital be capital and not this kind of hybrid operating capital and then capital.
So can you pull whatever advisory came up with, whenever that was, and we can add it to a future agenda for that specific comment?
Yes, I will.
All right, great. Is there any other questions for Chief Paulus on vehicles or Taser program before we kind of start to transition to the radio infrastructure? All right, so I don't know, Chiefs, which one of you is taking the lead on this piece, but I think for the benefit of the broader group, given some are brand new to town government, the committee, I think just maybe a 2 to 3 minute background on where we're at in our journey on this, why it's so important, and where you're going with your capital item for this year.
I can give a little bit of background for everybody. Basically, if you think of the radio system, of course, you have the portable radios and the mobile radios that people are used to. But to make the system work, you need a main radio system, almost like a radio station does, where you have your transmitters and receivers, and they need to be located throughout the town. So we have our base of operations is out of the new public safety building. And then the transmitters and receivers are antennas located throughout the town. There's 3 of them. And to Kathy's point earlier, after we moved into the station, there were some upgrades that needed to be made. We had some communication gaps throughout the town where we couldn't talk, and dispatch couldn't hear us. So a quick fix without having a lot of capital was we assessed each site, and basically we had to replace a couple physical antennas. So it'd almost be like the old days when you had your cable, when you had your over-the-air antenna on your roof. It wasn't working very well, so we replaced those. The broader scope is this equipment is technology. It's starting to get very old. Its quality is very old. So we're having gaps in communications, especially emergency communications throughout the town. So Chief Paulus and I are looking at ways to improve the radio communications. If we can't talk and dispatch can't hear, we're going to have some significant safety issues with our personnel, both fire and police. So we're looking at how to evaluate the radio coverage appropriately in town. How do we make sure that, are there other new technologies that we can employ? Much like computers and anything electronic, there is a generational issue with having older equipment. And I can't stress enough, and I know Chief Paulus can add to this, is it is very critical that we have 24/7, 365 emergency radio coverage throughout the town. Just because we moved to a new station, think of those transmitters and receivers are still located where they were before, and they're aging, so we still have gaps. So the approach that we're looking at is what's the best way to improve the radio infrastructure in the town so both police, fire can consistently communicate. So that's the down and dirty what we're looking at trying to do. And Chief Paulus, I'll add if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think if you look back into history, it's kind of been discussed for the last 20 years. And the good news is I think we're almost there. So obviously we have all the new equipment in the public safety building. And then another upgrade that we needed to do was run the fiber optic to the tower sites, one on Overlook Drive, one on Crystal Pond. We've done that. It's done a lot to bring some stability to the system where it's not going down every 2 minutes. I think like we just talked about, we upgraded, or in the process, we upgraded the Overlook Drive antenna. We're waiting for the Crystal Pond antenna to be corrected. So then the last part of it would be some coverage area issues around town. And traditionally, the eastern and northern sections, kind of like Pine Hill Road and down by Framingham, have been weak areas or dead areas. So the thought was, right now, I might have some good news. So they were looking at maybe, do we need a third tower site for reception? We've been investigating some things, and preliminarily, we looked at switching the system over to all digital, which I'm told would be an expenditure of somewhere around $40,000. That might cure it. So we've done some testing preliminarily and very recently, that if we switched the all digital over, that both the mobiles and the portables would work perfectly. We need to do some more testing, and when the leaves come on the trees and in different weather conditions, but that's what we're looking at right now. So if we can avoid a huge expenditure for a third radio tower site, I think that's going to be good news, and that's the way it's tracking right now.
And just for everybody, if you think of your old CD player, digital versus analog, the quality, that's really what we're doing. And the good part is we've been buying our radio components. So our physical radios have the ability to go both digital and analog. There may be some expenses just to make sure that's consistent throughout, but with Chief Paulus and I and some of our members, we've been trying to test this. We've been just waiting for more coverage of the canopies so that we can, on the trees, so we can get a better picture. If you do it in the winter, you might get a false positive that it works very well, so we're waiting. But this is something emerging, and we hope that it saves a significant amount of capital that we would have had to expend to add another site.
So who is actually, so Chief Achilles, you were hired after we had this debate the last time. So we spent quite a bit of money in fiscal year 20 on Overlook Drive, getting the repeater up to replacing it, I think, completely. We didn't know we were going to have to do the fiber from Crystal Pond, but we did. We did a reserve fund transfer for that. I thought we were done at that point. And I'm going to direct this to Chief Paulus because he was intimately involved in this. We got the Municipal Technology Committee involved because no one seemed to know everything. Everybody knew a little bit, but everybody would say, I don't know the whole thing. I'm not a radio person. So we got the MPC involved, and they came back and made a recommendation. So that's why I'm surprised. I thought we were done at that point, but it sounds like we're not. Who is advising us right now that we could spend the $40,000 and possibly be done versus building the third tower?
Well, I think the consensus of agreement was all that infrastructure had to be replaced anyway because it was so old and dated, and then we needed to switch over to fiber. So I think the consensus was we were going to do all that and see where we were, and that's the point that we're at right now. So we can do our own testing, and if it works perfectly, I think that's the route we can go with the all digital. If it's not working that way, then we're going to have to bring in a consultant to do the testing all over town and to give us a firm report on what needs to be done to finish the system. So we're hoping to avoid that, but I think that was the consensus all along. We didn't know what all these improvements to the aging infrastructure, what it was going to do. So that's the point that we're at right now.
So the 45K is the solution if we can convert to digital completely. That's what the 45 is for.
Yeah, I don't even think we knew that when we were putting this together. We just put a number out there that we might have to go to a third tower site. And we didn't know what that would cost. You're gonna have to bring in a company to do all this testing and to give us a report. And we wouldn't even know who would allow us to put these components, if there was a third tower site, where it would be, what the FCC allows. So it was just kind of like a number that was thrown out there that, hey, we might need this to move forward. That's my recollection of it. Chief Achilles, what do you think?
I think it was a placeholder because we weren't sure if it was going to be the study or at least the beginnings. It was not going to, we knew that if you're going to put a new tower up or a new site, that would not even be close to covering it. But we thought there would have to be money set aside for a comprehensive study and some seed money for a consultant. Also for Kathy, we have a member on our department that's very savvy and has a lot of background in radio communications. He's on our regional district fire mutual aid task force for communications. And he's our liaison with us, our radio manufacturer, and also our radio repair shop. So we're trying to leverage his expertise. Some of this evaluation we're able to do with portable and mobile radios throughout the town, and excuse me, and switch over to a digital communications on a temporary basis to see if it works. So the good part for both police and fire is we're not expending a lot of money on something that a lot of communities would have to bring in a consultant and a radio company to do all this. So we're trying to do as much background and legwork we can at the most efficient cost. And I think we're on the track, and it could save the taxpayers a lot of money if this is successful. So we're cautiously optimistic that this will work.
Okay,
also-
well, I agree that this number wasn't fleshed out the last time we were dealing with this. Advisory had a big problem with this number because we didn't think that there was anything we just knew that there was nothing to really support the number, but we still got the same number in the proposal. So does the 45 today mean more than it used to?
Sorry, Kathy, I may have cut you off there. Just say that question again.
Does the 45 that we still have, because that's what we had before, this hasn't changed, does it mean any more as far as really understanding how we're going to spend it today than it did 2 months ago? Do we now have an idea of what the 45 really means, or is it still is it still a placeholder?
I think it's an appropriate number. Again, we're cautiously optimistic that we can do what we need to do. There's some physical components that we have to purchase and have to have installed to make this work. Basically, if you can think about it, it's in layman's terms, it's just you need a converter to go from digital. So all our sites need to be able to talk on digital. So our member that came up with the plan, again, we're working with our manufacturers and trying to make sure that number is still consistent. I think it's a pretty solid number to start with because it's basically the components that we would need and the labor to put them in. So we're just trying to make sure it's still consistent with what we already have. So I think it's pretty solid.
So
Have you conferred with MTC in the last few months about this? Because they have a radio person that they did consult with a year ago when we were talking about the upgrades to Overlook Drive.
I have not. I know we've been working with Motorola and our local radio dealer and their technicians on vetting out this plan. So I feel confident that we're heading in the right direction.
So just one
Mark
second, Chief.
Chief Head Paul said something.
Yeah, I guess just to help round the conversation out, and then Chief, I'll call you in. But the expense, if I look back at what the town has spent on public safety radio, and then I look at kind of this total, then taking this, this 45,000. If we're able to solve the problem and stop there, this town has made out very, very well. Even though you look at some of the dollar sums that were spent to extend, down to Overlook, down to Crystal Pond, and the nature of how some of those requests came up. Go to any neighboring community, larger, smaller, their numbers are, 500,000 to $1 million plus to deal with public safety radio infrastructure. The key thing with all of them, though, has been that they're all of these newer systems that tend to be working tend to be on digital, which is where they're now going, which I think is important. If I were to have looked at this before Chief Paulus's update in terms of what they were going to use this for, I would have said the 45 is light. I would have no backing for what that is, but just looking at what other towns have expended to deal with it, I think we need to try anything we can to avoid having to put up another tower, just because we don't know where that tower is going to go. And naturally, wherever that tower is going to go, the people around there are not going to want it. Right? So then you run into obstacles well beyond cost. But at the end of the day, I personally would argue that radio infrastructure sometimes is even more important than some of the vehicles that these public safety responders are responding in. Granted, they have to get to the scene, but they don't have a way to communicate back. It's a much bigger issue. So Chief, I think I wanted to add that perspective in, but I don't know, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think Steve was absolutely correct. It was just a placeholder till we explored what was going on. But just to give maybe the other committee members some history lesson, I thought, when we did the building committee, that a lot of this would be taken care of. So the usual process is to build a tower on site, maybe 300 feet, state of the art, all new equipment. Because of some other issues, it was decided to not go in that direction. And unfortunately, a lot of the money that was saved couldn't be expensed out of the building committee's budget because it was off-site. So I know you can speak on that a lot better than I can, Jason. But a lot of that savings in the public safety building budget comes out of not doing anything on-site with the radio system.
It was definitely at least 150,000 that we had earmarked as part of the town meeting authorization that we just never spent because no one had an appetite to build a 300-foot tower on that site for obvious reasons.
That's all I got.
Jason, can you you said 150,000, is that what the tower would cost if we were to,
So
I don't think I had that perspective. And
so when we did the public safety budget, we tried to break it down as much as possible. We were working with an architect. They did a pretty good job breaking down the components, but there were some components that were never needed. So for example, we actually budgeted for a traffic light on Route 85 and design around that. We never, as anyone's driven by, there's no traffic light there because there was no reason to include one after we did some traffic counts, et cetera. Same thing here, right? As they said, cost of about 150 to put a tower up because of obviously the neighborhood's involvement and ultimate support of the actual building. We thought this was a better path was to explore improving the other sites and working towards kind of the center. So that's how that 150 came up. It was quite honestly kind of throwing a dart at a wall, but at the same time, it was real savings.
So have we spent the $70,000 that was approved at last year's town meeting for the improvement of police and radio systems that came out of the ambulance fund?
I'd have to defer to somebody else. I don't recall us spending any money out of that.
Well, that's the fiber line. That
No,
was the fiber line.
that's
So that was
different,
done.
Jason. It's not the fiber line. That's actually police and radio. So the fiber was 30,000 and that didn't come out of ambulance funding. Then advisory approved, did a reserve fund transfer.
Kathy, there's multiple fiber lines. So Tom, are you on? Can you speak to what was approved at last town meeting and which fiber line that covered?
Yeah, so Kathy's right. There were multiple approvals. There was the fiber to Overlook Drive that was completed. There was the upgrade of the both remote sites, I believe, was the other capital item. And then there was some portion that was taken out of the building money, which was the infrastructure that physically resides in the station. Okay, so all of that money was expended, and that was, and the discussion all along during that was that these were all required maintenance items. Basically, they were end-of-life equipment that needed to be replaced, and exactly what Chief Paulus had said was that the discussion was, we need to do this, and then we need to see where this leads us. Those improvements allowed for the migration to digital when the departments are ready. They allowed for DPW radios to be able to be upgraded, and that project is actually on track right now. They will be going on all digital. So at the very worst, we will be able to use the DPW trucks to facilitate in that coverage validation once they are up and running. And as far as MTC weighing in, they have not weighed in on this particular item yet. The person that did take a look at the existing radio system before last town meeting was he identified a couple places that might work as a third location if needed, but those also still have their challenges beyond the locations. Most of them were radio towers, and my understanding is that are water towers. My understanding is that water towers are not actually ideal because of their composition, but they are town-owned property, so theoretically you have a little bit more flexibility. So, but yes, I think that just like everything else, we need to continue to look at how we can make it better. And I would definitely stand by what the chiefs are looking at this point to investigate the digital. And my understanding is that can improve the coverage a certain percentage. And that, again, this is not necessarily the end of the discussion. It could be that the environment changes over time, whether it's more building or, as I said, tree coverage can certainly impact radio signals.
So Tom, just to be clear, the $70,000, I'm looking at the ambulance fund right now. It doesn't look to me like it's been spent. Do we think it's been spent at this point? My numbers are a couple months old. As
I can recall, and this is, seeing multiple bills go through, is that that money has been spent. And I think the bills may have just come through within the past month or so. My recollection is that they were kind of crossing in as we were entering this COVID environment. So.
And just to be clear, I absolutely support making sure that we have total communication in every spot in Southborough. I'm just trying to make sure that we don't make a decision and then wish we'd done something else. So we've actually thought through what we should do long term.
No, and I think that the move to the digital is, again, it's the way to go. From my discussions with the radio vendor and with the consultant that MTC brought in, digital is going to allow for much better feature sets, including encrypted radio transmissions for sensitive events. Again, it's not going to solve all coverage issues, but it can certainly help.
Are there any other questions on radios? Chief Paulus, are you planning to stay on, or are you going to be leaving us?
Nope, unless you need me for something, I'm all set, so.
So why don't I do this, given that we're going to be taking a vote later on in the meeting on the FY20, especially the FY20 spring request. I'm going to make a motion that we support the police taser program, police chief vehicle, and police and fire antenna maintenance and purchase. Before Chief Pauls leaves, just so that he has some closure of at least where our position is. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Jason, can you break them out into more than one motion and do the antennas separately?
I can, so I'm going to withdraw that motion. I'm going to make a motion that we support police taser and then police chief vehicle. Is there
For the spring or for the
for
next?
spring 2020 town meeting request?
Second.
All right, seconded by Lisa. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Aye.
Joe, I didn't hear
Brascio, aye.
you.
Palmer, aye.
Jeff?
Hawkeye.
All right, that passes unanimously. So make a second motion to support the police and fire chief's request for the antenna maintenance and purchase for $45,000. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, seconded by Lisa. Any further conversation on that one? Kathy, did you want to add something in there just before we vote?
I think we've discussed it enough. I'm going to vote against it, but I think we discussed it enough.
Okay. All right, so roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Hawkeye.
Cook, no.
Brascio, aye.
Palmer, aye.
All right, so 5-1. I got that right, everyone? Okay. Chief Paulus, thank you for your time and have a great day.
All right, you too, thank you.
All right, so Chief Achilles, I know this is an awkward order to do it, but I just, given that you've, I think, just celebrated your year anniversary, and Chief Paulus is a veteran of the town at this point. I think before we dive into any of your details, just maybe I think the committee, 30 seconds on your background, understand the perspective that you're bringing to some of the things.
You broke up a little bit, Jay, but as far as capital goes, when I took the position here, of course, a lot of the focus was on operations and transitioning to the new public safety building. Most of you know some of my background. I've been in municipal fire service for quite a few years and have done a lot of capital planning. In the capital, there's certain benchmarks and guidelines that fire services use and best practices. Some of them, when you get to vehicles and apparatus, are based on NFPA standards. There's also studies and research out there on ambulance replacement. NFPA and manufacturers have replacement and life cycles of air packs and structural PPE, hose. So I did send to Jason that capital replacement guidelines. So I just want, it was important that everybody knows that most of the replacement cycles or life cycles that we're looking at are based on a standard or best practice. But I will caution that we also have to design it around Southborough and its usage. So I'm still in that process. The FY21 budget request, I think is very solid, but as we move forward, some of the out years will be revised and adjusted, again, on occurrence, use, and to make sure. One of the things I've been working on the last 2 months is just our current, we're trying to get a bigger grasp on our inventory, age, replacement schedules, and that's based on what was done in the past 5 to 10 years. So you'll see for FY21, we have the engine replacement.
Chief, can I just stop you there for 2 seconds? Just
Yep.
one, can you give the folks that maybe aren't in the fire service what NFPA is?
Yep.
And
So-
what that means?
I'm sorry. So the National Fire Protection Association is sets consensus standards throughout the industry. Often these standards become law and rule. So a lot of our fire protection measures, our laws and rules are developed by the National Fire Protection Association. They have multiple standards. And the good part is it's a industry-wide consensus standard that often is referred to when they're developing laws, rules, or policies and procedures within a fire organization. They have many, they're out of Quincy, Mass. They have anybody that's in any of the trades. Often the National Fire Protection Association standards dovetail or support the building codes, electrical codes. So these are, as a good example is for fire apparatus, the standard is for the inspection, maintenance, testing, and retirement of in-service vehicles. They also have a standard on what a fire truck needs to be in its components. And if it hasn't been shared, I can send it to the other members of the committee to see, so show them what the standards or benchmarks we're using to make our decisions.
Chief, that's the document you sent last week?
Yes.
So that's in the folder for today's meeting for everyone. I think we all have that. So, and then Chief, I think maybe the best way to walk us through this is walk through the current year requests and then go back and just deal with vehicles and then PPE, separately.
Yep. So on this year's request is the replacement of the 2001 fire engine. For those that are aware, we have two what we'd call fire pumpers or fire engines, one tower truck, and 2 ambulances are the primary fleet. So this replacement is identified as $600,000. It does not include any equipment. So that's one area that we're going to have to discuss. Often in the past in Southborough Fire, if a piece of apparatus was replaced, they would just take the stuff off that and put it on the new fire truck. As you can see, if at a 20-year-old fire truck, we have a lot of equipment that may be 20 years or older because it was transferred over. So I'll just speak to the cost of the truck. A replacement plan and life cycle for fire apparatus is between 20 and 29 years. Mileage by itself is not a good indicator because these trucks often idle. As you can see, if you imagine when they get on scene, they're not always driving. So that engine 22 or that 2001 fire apparatus has just under 60,000 miles on it, but it has over 4,000 hours, and a calculating measure for that is about 30 miles per hour. So it has over 120,000 miles on it if it were to drive all the time. Technology-wise, it's ending its life. We are fortunate that it was repaired once and refurbished once. My concern is if we don't do this now, we're gonna place in jeopardy our ability to have a second fire apparatus that's consistently available. So I think this is a good time to do this. It will also create a cycle, although you try to run something first due as its primary resource, and then put it in backup anywhere between 10 and 16 years. So this will kind of go into that cycle with the other pumper that we that's not that very old. I think it's a 2017. So it'll be in the right cycle, and it will establish, it will kind of be a good starting point for reevaluating the replacement plan of the apparatus. So that is the fire engine that is on for the replacement. It takes about a year to build. They're custom built. Most, and I think this discussion came up early this year with advisory, that you can't buy a fire truck off the lot. You can't go to a dealership and start buying fire trucks. They're built by manufacturers, different manufacturers throughout the country. They have specifications that you build it to, and then they'll build it. And I guess good or bad, if we were to move forward on this, we would not, excuse me, we would not see it for another year. So that's another consideration that we need to put out there is every year the cost will go up. So the further we push this out, you can add about 3 to 5% every year you push it out. And that's why we really would like to please place the order and secure the cost before the summer's over. So that's the engine. Any questions on that? Or do you want me to keep on going?
Any questions for the chief on specifically to the engine?
I have one, Jason, please.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So Chief, just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So the $600,000 is just to replace the engine, not add the equipment. So what is the cost to add the equipment? Am I missing that in some of the numbers here?
Yep, so we don't have it in the budget.
Okay.
What we would want for consideration that's not included is about $30,000. We went through some equipment over the years has been purchased and we can transfer it over. It's not that old, but there are other equipment, hose, nozzles, ladders, and tools and appliances that have extended their useful life. And we thought maybe we could purchase some of those out of the operating budget. But as I think everybody knows, we're going to have a lot of pressures on our FY21 and 22 budgets. So something that we thought we could absorb in our operating budget may not be feasible. So that's why it wasn't presented earlier for consideration. So we think that's a reasonable cost. Most of these things that we're requesting are not part of the normal replacement plan. But
So should we realistically be looking to increase that 600,000 to 630,000?
I think it would be appropriate whether that 30,000 is a consideration in the September meeting
Okay.
versus now, because we do have some time. So I think that I would like that for a consideration at some point.
Thank you.
So
Chief,
Lisa,
how do you know 600 is a good number today?
We have reached out to a number of manufacturers and dealers. We have, I guess the best way to say is brands like some people like Fords, Dodges, and Chevys.
Mhm.
There are different brands of fire apparatus, and we fortunately have a brand that we use as our primary engine. The dealership is in Massachusetts, and their service is extraordinary and they are close. We've had very good luck. And it also allows us to have operational consistency between the two. So we've reached out to them and we asked a preliminarily, what would it take to build a pumper that is similar to the one we have now? And we're working diligently to get it at $600,000, but I think we can.
So have you asked the question post-COVID as far as whether the virus changes anything as far as they believe, as far as timetable, cost?
Currently, no. There's not been any delay in that they've announced as far as their manufacturing of the apparatus. But I can't tell you that 6 months from now, they may not have a delay. And that would be the other variable, I think, Kathy, that is important to consider is if the longer we put this off, we have more chance of having extended delays and price increases for multiple reasons. So I think it's prudent to try to get that at least tied up, secured now.
I just would have thought, given that a lot of the vehicle manufacturing plants are closed throughout the country, that those guys might also have had an impact on their schedule.
Well, because, for example, we purchased a brand called E1, Emergency One. They're built at one factory in Florida, so they don't have multiple factories. They have one factory. So I think that's a little, it could be a double-edged sword, right? One factory could have a problem, but they don't have multiple factories building multiple apparatus. So I think we're pretty confident. However, I say that and I hope that they don't have an outbreak in their own factory.
I just want to go back to Lisa's question because I thought it was great. And it candidly came up in a conversation the chief and I were having last week. And I said, oh, so what new equipment are you buying with the 600? And he goes, what equipment? And I think that it's not a great practice to be buying an engine without the appropriate, some of the equipment should come over, right? And you shouldn't just go buy everything new. But I am a big proponent of, if the 600 were to pass at the spring town meeting, have the chief and his team be ready to go and submit and get a full quote right after they know that they have the authorization to spend it. And in an optimistic view of the world, maybe it comes back at 550, 560, but phrase the language in such an authorization at town meeting that it would allow them to buy equipment if there are excess funds, and hope that the chief doesn't have to come back to us in the fall for anything else. But I think we need to be on notice that there may be something that he needs for that to equip it the right way for the next 20 years. So I think we need to be aware of that. But I also am not, I personally would not vote in favor of changing the 600 today. I think it's more this committee being aware of the ins and the outs and being kept in the know about where Chief Achilles is at in the process of procuring the vehicle as that develops and as he has funding to actually use.
I'm surprised, Jason, you don't think whatever the number is as far as the new stuff shouldn't go ahead and be part of this in one fell swoop.
As much as I am very pro-fire, I think we know we're having a fall town meeting. We don't need this equipment to equip the vehicle for a year at this point. And we basically have almost 2 town meetings, because you also have the annual next year to fund some of this before the vehicle is actually in the garage. If Chief Achilles was sitting here saying, my jaws of life are broken, and we're going to be rolling one piece of apparatus with the jaws for the next year, I'd have a very different view. But we're talking about equipping something that's not going to be in a garage for almost 18 months.
So I agree with that, but I thought, maybe I misunderstood what the chief said. I thought he said it's not on the capital plan at all.
It's not. So I
If it's not,
think
it
we
should be
need to
on there.
have it as a placeholder
Yep.
for the fall. But I absolutely do not recommend that we adjust the 600 for the spring. And I think we work like crazy to find a way that that never actually ends up having to be a town meeting warrant article in the fall. And we find, you know, whether it's grants, donations, et cetera, pilot, we'll come back to that. You know, there are other ways to potentially fund and get what the department needs operationally without having to just go to the taxpayers first.
But if we're trying to make sure we've got a really tight 10-year capital plan, that's one of the goals of this committee. I still don't see why you wouldn't put it on fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23. We can talk about how we're going to pay for it separately, which is part of what we're going to do, but it still should be on there as something that we are pretty confident we're going to have.
No doubt. So I don't know if we need, I don't know that we necessarily need a motion, but I think one of the to-dos coming out of this is we should put a placeholder for 30K for the fall in hope that that line just magically disappears as the summer goes on.
I agree.
Yeah, Jason, one thing, I was looking at the capital plan. I think the total's 685 in there. And then on top
But
of that, I
Jason-
also see debt service in the ambulance fund. So I'm not sure if we're double counting it.
Andrew, the 685 is including the debt service. So that is the debt service. I'm looking at the debt service thing. So 685 is the 600 plus 85 of interest over the 5 years they've got
Okay.
bonded for.
And then I also see it in the ambulance fund.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
how
that's
they're
how it
trying to
gets paid.
pay for it, is through the ambulance fund. So
It actually doesn't hit the tax rate.
Okay.
And we're gonna
If-
talk about ambulance fund in general, because we could probably spend the rest of the day on the ambulance fund if we really wanted to, which we can't. So I think for now, while we have the chief, let's focus on his needs and whether they're valid needs and the costs associated with that. Then I think this committee is gonna have to do a lot of work on how we fund some of those needs, because that's not an easy solution.
Jason, I did have a question though, for the equipment, the 30,000, what is, for the chief, what is the lead time you need on that though? It's not, obviously not like a truck, but how much time do you need in order to get that stuff?
You need probably 2 to 3 month lead time, so it's not so bad. Most of this equipment is carried by manufacturers. I was just gonna go back. I had a previous email that we did an inventory, but it's a complement of ground ladders, it's hose, it's nozzles, it's rescue packs for the firefighters if we have an issue. I call them appliances, but basically it's valves, portable valves, and shutoffs. So most of that is carried by manufacturers. And if we were to try to order it today, and we had the money, I'd say, okay, I probably get a complement of ladders within 4 to 6 weeks. So we would just need enough lead time, but I agree with Jason that as we move forward, I need to be more diligent of making sure that we include appropriately equipped apparatus when we purchase them. Because it doesn't, often you can either equip it through a capital or operating budget. And I think the operating budget's going to have some challenges over the next couple of years. So we need to be better at including those.
Okay, thank you.
The next 5 years.
Yes, next 5 years.
Any questions on the engine before we go to the chief vehicle?
No.
All right, chief, why don't you give us a brief overview on car 20?
Okay, so we have two, if you call them staff cars, but I want to explain that they're both emergency response vehicles. So they're equipped, it's just not a Explorer, an Expedition that is used for business. Those are vehicles that are required to go to emergency calls, and typically they are used as a mobile command post or a place to run the incident from. So they need to be able to go out all year round, any weather, and basically be equipped to be a on-scene communication and management location. So when I took over, there was a 2013 Ford Explorer that was assigned to the fire chief and a 2017 Expedition assigned to the prevention officer. The 2013 Ford Explorer, even though it doesn't have a lot of age, normally I like to replace a staff or support vehicle for a fire department within anywhere between 5 and 10 years. It really wasn't designed to be a mobile incident command post, or it wasn't really designed as a good fire department staff vehicle. The plan is to replace the 2013 Ford Explorer. Some advantage is right now it only has 70,000 miles on it. So I think it could be repurposed within the town, minus all the lights, for somebody. And the replacement would be very similar to the 2017 Expedition we have. That way there's continuity. Both vehicles are prepared to be used as an emergency vehicle and command post. The other advantage is I would transfer the 2017 Expedition over to the prevention officer so that it's always available here. And I think if we based a 100,000 mile 10-year guidance on replacement, we might get 10 to 12 years more on the 2017 Expedition. So I think it's appropriate to try to reset and get the right vehicle now. And that puts us out quite a few years before we have to do replacements again. If we don't do that, I will be requesting in the next couple of years a replacement of the Expedition again. And I'll take any questions on that approach or that vehicle.
Any questions on that?
I have one, please.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So Chief, in getting the new vehicle and shifting the vehicles to fire prevention and whatnot, is there a vehicle that we're going to be taking out of the fleet?
Yep, so what we'll do is we'll take the 2013 Ford Expedition.
Yeah.
And we'll replace that. So we'll still maintain only 2 staff vehicles. We won't have a third.
Okay, so the 2013 could be used, as you said, for any other potential town purpose minus the lights. Though I would
Right.
like to say the selectmen need a vehicle with lights. That would be kind of good.
Well, maybe we'll work that out.
I don't know if Mr. Purple would agree with that, but anyway. Okay, so it can potentially be repurposed. Okay, thank you.
Chief, it's the 2000, I think you might have used Explorer and Expedition interchangeably, but I don't, let's go to the 2013 vehicle that could be repurposed if you went through with this, right?
Yep.
That's an Explorer. That one used to be unmarked, right? And that was Chief Morrow's car.
Yep.
That's now marked, correct?
Yes.
So now we're gonna have to take all the decaling off again that you just put on it, if we went through with this, if it went to another purpose, is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess the fortunate part about that is I think it can easily come off. And I wouldn't want to think that as being a reason not to change it out.
Okay, so then if you think through the mileage question, or the mileage, you said 10 years, 100,000?
Yep.
And the Explorer doesn't even have 70,000 miles on it. And the Expedition has 12,000.
Yep.
How should we be thinking through, you're saying that's kind of your benchmark, right? If we kind of adopt your benchmarks and respect those benchmarks, but yet a vote in favor of this would go against those benchmarks, how should we be thinking
So
that? Because I think I think you're not necessarily replacing the vehicle, at least from what I understand, you're not replacing the vehicle based on mileage, you're replacing it
Correct.
based on functionality.
It's definitely based on functionality. It was a good approach, I think, at the time it was purchased. And I can't speak to why it was, all around when it was purchased, but I can assure you that for me, it was important. Like the Explorer was not designed to run an incident out of it, and I ran 2 fires out of it. I thought I would make it work, and it was. I'm glad the incident wasn't more complicated. It was very challenging to work out of. That's why in January I switched to the Expedition. As many of you know, I live close by. I live in Marlboro, and I respond to calls, whether I'm on duty or if it rises to the occasion, I will respond from my home. It's important to have that capability in the vehicles. I believe the Explorer was purchased more of a, again, a traditional staff vehicle and not a response vehicle. So this is a reset. What I'm hoping it does now, when it's I think a good time to do it is now we can reset, and I think the Expedition will get more life out of it because it only puts about 4,000 to 5,000 miles on it a year as a prevention vehicle. So we might see a 12-year cycle on that. I don't think it's hard fast that automatically it's 10 years you get rid of it. So I think we could look at, another 10 to 12 years before we even consider replacing that. And then it puts a new vehicle in 2020 out to 2030 minimally. So I think it now sets us up exactly on that cycle.
Chief, how much would it cost to retrofit the current car to those standards?
There's a distinct difference in what you can, and I think if you think of payload and design, if you had a small pickup versus a full-size pickup, or anybody that has a small SUV to a large SUV. So there are some, I don't think you could retrofit to do all the functionality in the Explorer as it sits to
He's asking about the Expedition, Chief.
What's that?
I think he's asking about retrofitting the Expedition. I could be wrong, Andrew, right?
Well, I think, no, I'm saying, so we have the Expedition, which works, right? And that's what you're using now. And then we have the Explorer that's got 70,000 miles.
Yep.
But it's, there's some difference between the Expedition and the Explorer. Yeah, they have different payload capacities, but what is it really missing that we can't just add in? And the new car you're looking at is an Expedition, not an Explorer?
Correct.
Okay.
So one is chassis. I mean, it's one of the things that's important for us is to be able to have access no matter what weather. The Explorer is built more on like a car chassis. So you basically don't have the ground clearance. You don't have the payload. You don't have the room to put a what we call as a command box in the back. Also, you got to remember we use the back as an area, a workspace. So when you lift up the back gate, you want to be able to get underneath it and work. So it really is not designed as that type of response vehicle. And I would be hesitant to start investing a lot of money into that vehicle, knowing that in 2 to 3 years, we would want to be looking at replacing it.
So can I just, Chief, can I just ask a question? So I hear your point on the Explorer. Does the Expedition function for what you need as a chief today?
Yes.
Okay. So really, this is basically a contingent, basically a contingency plan. So like if you say your car is in the shop, that there still is a command vehicle in town that you or one of your shift commanders could use.
That's correct.
Okay.
Jason, can I just ask one question?
Go ahead, Lisa.
So Chief, knowing that we're 2 to 3 years away from replacing the Explorer anyway, what would you estimate the cost would be if there was a retrofit done? I'm just trying to weigh if it's even worth to even give it any consideration.
So if we were to put $4,000 to $5,000 into this vehicle, it still doesn't function the way we want it to.
Yeah.
And the other concern, of course, is if we were to replace the Expedition in 2 to 3 years, what does that cost in the out years? Where I think if we did it now, we could see some cost savings. Plus, we allow that 2017 vehicle to be put in a different role for a little while. So I think it will extend its life.
Okay, thank you. I mean, for me, trying to consider, is it worth on a vehicle that's going away in a couple years to make the investment in retrofitting it, or actually just get the vehicle that has everything you need versus trying to piecemeal. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of retrofitting the Explorer. It's way too small for what they carry around. I think the question the way the committee should think about it is if Chief Achilles is saying the 2017 Expedition works perfectly for what he needs as a chief right now, how important and imminent is it to replace that vehicle to kind of get the I guess the 2-for-1 sort of thing in terms of the backup, right? Just same arguments that were just had on the engine in terms of you can try to start the engine, it doesn't start, right? Like you still need these vehicles to be running. So I think that's at least how I'm approaching it. But I am not a fan of retrofitting the Explorer. If the Expedition had needed some work and needed retrofitting, that absolutely would have been something I would have considered. But I'm not hearing that that's the case, Chief.
Correct. And they did a great job designing the Expedition, and that would be the vehicle again. I think it's the appropriate size, design, and functionality. And I think it's a good time to do it. I would be hesitant to extend the length, but it's possible. But I think that causes some bigger issues down the road.
Yeah, I mean,
In terms of what?
Well,
What?
I think cost. I think vehicle, if we were to have two things. One, right now, if the Expedition is out of service, we have no second due command vehicle. And infrequently, but sometimes I'm not available. And the shift captain or an officer is on call, so they have no vehicle to run out of. So that coupled with the cost, if we were to do this 3 or 4 years down the road, I would probably be asking for $70,000. So I think it's a better use of the funds now than it would be to do this 3 or 4 years down the road.
yeah, my only situation there is if we think these are going to last about 10 years, then if we do it 2 years down the road, now we're in cycle. So we have a 2017 and we have a 2022, then we have a backup and a primary.
Well, and that's where I mentioned that how often the mileage per year, based on what I've known in this last year, is that the prevention vehicle, because it's not taken home, stays at the station and then is used by the prevention officer, only runs about 4,000 to 5,000 miles a year. So I think there's some value or opportunity to make it last more than 10 years to get that 100,000 miles. So that's where I think we're going to see a saving. So I apologize. I don't want to think that 10 years is steadfast. I think you have to look at the mileage. And 10 years is a good benchmark for the Chiefs vehicle because it's putting about 10,000 miles a year on it. The prevention vehicle may actually last longer. As long as we can keep it well maintained, I think it could last past its 10-year mark and get to that 100,000 mile mark.
So to that point, it might be even better to push this off 3 or 4 years. So you get, so say if it's 12 years or 14 years, then you have one that's 7 years old, then you have another one that, you get, so every 7 years, every 6 years, you replace them in a schedule, as opposed to having a 2017 and a 2020 or a 2021. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess where I'm also, sorry, Chief, do you want to respond to that?
The other part of this discussion that we had is the functionality. I would agree with you if they're both expeditions, but that's not the case.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, it's been working since 2013 as a backup. Can we stretch it out a couple of years to, we're asking for fire truck. We just did we're getting a lot of stuff here. So I think it might be, something to meet us halfway and push it out a couple of years.
Just to be clear, Andrew, the former fire chief, it wasn't a backup. The former fire chief chose to operate out of the Explorer. That was the vehicle he chose. He also purchased the 2017 Expedition, chose not to use. I actually agree. If I were in Chief Achilles' seat, I agree with how he's using the 17 Expedition, given what is expected of a chief fire officer. I'm just saying that's kind of why we're in the predicament. And I think, Chief, I guess, I don't know if I'm just speaking for myself or other committees believe this. If we were in February pre-COVID, I think the discussion around this probably wouldn't be as robust. I think what we're trying to assess is this a nice to have or a must have? I didn't hear anyone saying that the engine was a nice to have. That seemed more like a must have, versus this is coming through a little bit more as a nice to have. I think there's clear need, speaking as someone that benefits from a structure where there's 2 interoperable cars that can go between a chief and a command officer and take home cars and stuff like that. I think it's very beneficial, but is it something that I could stand before a town meeting and say, we have to do this now, versus an engine is we have to do this now? I think that's where I'm, at least if I'm reading the faces on the screen here and where the discussion is going.
And I think I appreciate perspective. Of course, I'm trying to forecast also.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's something that's going to be a need to have. And, when we started this process, we took out and moved a number of things around and eliminated some things to make this work. Realizing that, to Andrew's point, we don't want to overwhelm the capital, but I know in out years, we're going to have other requests like structural firefighting gear. We're looking for a grant for self-contained breathing apparatus. If we don't get those grants, we're going to have some substantial requests. So I think it's appropriate to look at it now than to push it out too far, because I think things are going to start log jamming later on in the next few years. And I think it is appropriate response and it may in the long run be better for the department and less pressure on the capital.
Chief, I have a question. Have you done any investigation into, given the state of current auto sales, whether that we could negotiate a much better deal because we're in COVID and because auto sales are very slow, that there may be an opportunity to gain a better price and therefore mitigate this and maybe finance it out, get them to finance it out farther?
Mark or Brian, let me have Mark or Brian, just because that's a procurement question. Deal with how state bid list works, Chief, unless you feel very comfortable with state bid list.
I know a little bit about state bid in Mass. I know what it was in New Hampshire, but it's, I'll let, if Brian or Mark want to weigh in, but because there are some parameters on purchasing and may not be able to negotiate better prices There are
Yeah.
ways around that, but I got to make sure it's correct.
Mark or Brian, when do you want to take how that works?
So I'll speak to that briefly, Jason. I think that the chief, in 10 words or less kind of outlined it. You've got a state bid list. They provide the pricing for the vehicle. There is really no negotiation. And it's kind of an off the shelf option. And then, there are things that you can do to it beyond that price. So it's not always the best deal, but it's the easiest, so that you don't have to do a lot of the procurement. It's all done for you. But it is, it isn't always the best price, but it is the easiest way to do it. So I think that's the easiest answer.
Does that apply to vehicles bought used?
Vehicles used, there really is no procurement or no state bid list for used vehicles. That becomes a little bit trickier.
It also, I just want to make sure, I think the other option is the 2013 Ford Explorer we're not going to see the actual cost of this, but at this point can be, I think, repurposed in the town. I know over the past year we've had town employees that need vehicles for work. So I think it's not something I can't show a trade-in value, but I think the cost that Joe is mentioning about reducing by putting this back into the fleet, or opportunity to put it in the town's fleet, I think we'll see some savings. So maybe in the overall, we're not hit the total cost, what you see that.
Well, we have nothing, I guess the only problem with that, chief, is there's nothing else budgeted in any other department other than police for a vehicle. So it really isn't saving us as much as it could. It's just putting another vehicle with another license plate in someone else's parking lot. That, do we really need it? And that department head hasn't come before us to request something, or board of selectmen or advisory.
Jason, I'm sorry, Jason. The one thing I'll add to that is again, where do we end up putting it? And I don't want to put something someplace that is going to be, good for 3 or 4 years, that a vehicle doesn't already exist, with the understanding that it goes away and doesn't get replaced in 3-4 years. But then in 4 years, it's a necessity, and now we're looking at a replacement vehicle. So I don't want to just do that blindly. We'd have to take a look. The building inspector vehicle would probably be one that would be a logical transition, but because the vehicles failed on that, while the building inspector was driving it, we needed to do a replacement of that immediately. And so that option to transfer the vehicle at this point doesn't exist. So we'd have to take a look and see if anything made sense if we went that way.
Well, regardless of whether we support, obviously we eventually support this vehicle. The question is when. I don't see why we would put it on the first town meeting, regardless of what we do. I still think, we're trying to get, past the ones that we have to vote on quickly because they are going to be on that warrant, versus having time to put together the 10-year plan that we're comfortable with, that maybe we can have ready for the special town meeting where we would include this vehicle. So I don't see why it's got to go on the first one, no matter what. And if it really can last, 3 years is a lot. And yes, it will cost more because everything costs more. That's expected, but we also have the use of the money for the 3 years. So I'm not worried about the fact that it will cost more. It will cost more unless something strange has happened. But if it really is a vehicle that can realistically last 3 more years, I don't know why we would replace it this year with everything else we've got going on. And I hear, again, part of the reason we're doing this 10-year budget plan is because we've got such a big budget problem for the next 5 years. So we've really got to get a plan in place that we can afford to do. So if we've got some things down the road that the chief is worried that may not be paid for by grants, we need to deal with that in this capital plan also.
So is that a motion?
That was a philosophy. I'm happy to make an emotion to
So I want to move on.
postpone the
from-
decision.
I want to move on from the chief vehicle and get the committee's temperature one way or another on spring, fall, or defer to a future year. And then we got to talk about the Lucas devices quickly, and then I'm probably going to do a time check and just see how we want to proceed.
Well, I'm not sure how you're going to do what you just said. Are you going to do it item by item? So
So-
I
so-
would make a motion to postpone consideration of the replacement chief vehicle to the special.
In fall of 2020.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion on that motion?
I'm in favor of not putting it on the 2020 warrant altogether.
Well, you got to
Andrew, just
vote
be
on this one
specific
first,
there.
Andrew.
Spring, fall, or just all together?
I'm all together,
So basically, you're looking at future fiscal year.
future fiscal year.
Okay,
I have one question, Jason.
go ahead, Lisa.
So Chief, how long would it take to, in your estimation, if we got this vehicle, to get all the equipment and get it set up the way that you would need it? What is the time frame that we would be looking to do this?
I think if it was approved and we were able to make the order in July, we would get it by the fall.
So it's a fairly quick turnaround, within a couple months relatively?
Yes,
Okay.
because of the procurement process and the state bid,
Okay.
it's pretty easy.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So I don't disagree with Andrew as far as taking it off. What I was proposing was going to probably eventually get it taken off anyway, was just a temporary solution. I just don't want it on the main town meeting, the one that we used to call spring. That's not going to be June.
One
So-
question I had for Brian, if he's still on, is I still see the deputy car on the,
No, that's
Capital plan?
gone from the plan that was circulated last week, Andrew. Gone
Okay.
indefinitely.
okay, maybe I have an older version. Okay. And then for Chief Achilles, could this become the deputy car in the future?
It depends on our design, but yes, it could. And that would be, I think we talked about the deputy position this past year as we were preparing for the budgets, and I think for a while that's going to be postponed for added positions. But yes, that it would be designed in such a way that it could be that vehicle also.
And would we still need another vehicle or would that satisfy?
At that point, the design of a prevention vehicle could be a whole different type of vehicle that's less expensive. I've had experience in the past where we've done that and made it a pickup with a cab because it's not expected to be a command vehicle. It's more of a utility vehicle and inspection vehicle. So that is an option in the future.
Okay. I think moving it to the fall, given the short time turnaround time, just allows us to buy time to either A, permanently defer it, or B, say we're not in as bad of a financial crunch as we were. I just think it's a prudent move based on some of the priorities we've heard. That's kind of where I'm falling out on this one. So there's a motion. Unless anyone wants further discussion, we're going to vote. The motion, as a reminder, was just to delay it until the fall. And then obviously we'll take another vote over the summer on a recommendation for the fall. So those that want it longer, obviously will can have a view, more time to formulate a view during that. So I will start. Malinowski, aye.
Ratio I.
Okay.
Palmer, aye.
FI.
Okay, so that passes unanimously. So Chief, on that specific one, I would say, work obviously as the town financial situation unfolds here over the next couple, work with us to try to figure out ways around it. And obviously it'll still be on our radar screen for the fall.
That's
and we'll
reasonable.
Put that in our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen as well. So real quick on
Jason,
the,
I would add to that, it not only will be on our radar screen for the fall, but also in the 10-year plan. It will be on there someplace.
well,
Question
every
is what year.
7-ish years, right? I
Yeah.
think to Andrew's point.
Yeah, the other one is, I don't know if we could get an AFG grant or something for that as well, but
I wouldn't use it for that. I don't know, Chief, what your views are. I think
They
AFG is better
they typically
for,
won't, they typically won't do that.
AFG is better for like SCBA's gear, that sort of, actually better for us too. Chief, do you want to just touch on what a Lucas device is for those that aren't EMTs or medics, and what this new item is for 17,000 in the fall? Just so we
Sure.
can understand, is the fall the right timing, or do we actually need to pull that up?
So a Lucas device is a mechanical compression device to do CPR. It's on our Facebook page. If you're not sure, you can always look it up, and there's a video of it. We're fortunate that with our manpower, it's important to have this device so somebody's doing continuous CPR from the beginning all the way to the hospital. So it's actually allowed us to free up some of our personnel. We were able to trade in an older cardiac monitor manufactured by the same company earlier this year, because the initial was to get 2. That's why if some iteration of the capital, we might have had 40,000 in there. But we were able to leverage trade-in of a biomedical device and purchase the one Lucas device at around $12,000 to $13,000. So one's in service now. It's on the primary ambulance. It only makes sense to have it on the second ambulance. So we want to have 2. We don't need more than 2. And we believe the cost, if we were to purchase it sooner than later, would be $17,000. I would prefer that it is approved for, I know it was supposed to be in the fall. It got pushed off. I would still advocate for getting it earlier, but understand there's some pressures on that. But it is a piece of biomedical equipment that is utilized, when it's utilized, is extremely important to have.
So Chief, that's what you just said is not what I understood about the older one. I thought that one was leased, in that you were going to use your Harvard fund to pay off the 13K still owed on the lease.
Correct. So we now own one, and we need one more.
Okay, do you lease one or do you own one?
We leased it and then we purchased it.
Okay, and you use the Harvard money to pay off the lease?
Yes, working with the town administrator and the finance, we thought that was a better approach.
To pay it off, to pay the lease out.
Yeah, that way it wouldn't come out of, wouldn't be, that's why we went from, I think 30,000, there was
It was
different
30.
variation, 40
It was
to
30.
30. Now we're only asking for 17. So we
Okay,
took,
so the first one is totally, we have bought the lease out with and used the Harvard bookstore money dedicated to fire.
yeah, the depository.
So that's done, okay? Because I thought you said you traded it in another piece of equipment. for it.
We own it. We own it at this point. Or we own
Yep.
one and we're looking to buy one, right? That's
Correct.
the question in front of the committee.
Yep.
Is you have 2 ambulances. Do we think you need 2, or can you get by with 1, and what's the timing for the second? Right? That's the question we have to answer here.
would we pay for this out of the ambulance fund?
It's not in the ambulance fund right now, as far as,
It's
the ambulance fund's
not.
going to have a whole lot of, I mean, it's a different, as Jason said, it's a different discussion. It's got a whole lot of things that are projected to come out of it. Its receipts are down, so I would say no. This is going to come out of.
Well, Kathy, I think that the receipts are way up year over year. They're trending down the last couple of months, given the impact on call volume with COVID, actually somewhat counterintuitive, but obviously, Chief, right, you've had less motor vehicle accidents, those sorts of things. I guess To your question, Andrew, on ambulance fund, and I think I wanted to do it today. I don't know that we have time. My view going forward is ambulance fund should be ambulance equipment, ambulances themselves, and fire apparatus. Those are the only things that should be coming out of there. As you heard earlier in the meeting, right, there was a lot of radio money that came out of there last year. It's going to create a very precarious position as we move forward. So what I'd like to do next week, after we talk with Karen, is talk about ambulance fund. And actually, I'm going to bring probably recreation fund into that too, in terms of how capital items go through there and what policies we'd recommend on those going forward. But I think in an ideal world, I would support bringing this forward to the spring and having it at ambulance fund. I just don't know if the math works. And I think, we may need to go back and figure out where the receipts are trending based on now we should have April receipts in the next day or two, and then extrapolate out for May and June. If we can find a way before town meeting that this could be funded out of the ambulance fund, I think this should be in the spring warrant as an ambulance fund expenditure.
Yeah.
Mark and Brian come back and say it's going to be too tight. I don't know why we wait till the fall, because if we think we're inclined to do it, that second ambulance could roll just as quickly as that first to the type of call that needs this. Like, they don't do the most serious call first and then have the less serious call second, right? Like, it's like usually when stuff happens, it happens all at once. I don't know why it happens that way, but that's just how, I don't know, at least my life in EMS, that's how it's always worked. So I would support actually moving this up to the spring, just buying it. But when I move this for that purpose of discussion, I would move it condition on, myself working with Mark and Brian to see if we could support it through the ambulance fund. And if not, make it a general fund recommendation to the spring town meeting. Because I think this saves a back injury. This saves someone, if God forbid an ambulance gets in an accident. Yeah. Anyone that's done CPR on the back of an ambulance, you're just asking for trouble. This eliminates that, and candidly, you're getting a heck of a lot better patient care because it's giving the right compressions, the right type of compressions all at once.
And Jason, I would say if we've learned anything over the past 2 months is that, getting in front of these issues, like we, getting in front of COVID, we're kind of playing catch up now on that as a country. And if we can, something as simple as this, $20,000, if it's, at least from my opinion, if we can get in front of it, I think it just goes a long way to being prepared and ready and just having that in our back pocket, if you will.
I agree. We're only talking $17,000, but there's more ways to pay for this besides ambulance funds, so we should exhaust them all. But just put it on there and let's see what we can do as far as ways to
All
pay
right,
for it.
so I'm going to move that the capital committee moves accelerating the Lucas device from the fall town meeting to the annual town meeting, with the hopes of the chair working with Mark and Brian to see if it can be funded through ambulance or some other funding source. But if those fail, putting it forward as a general fund expenditure.
And I agree, other than you're going to need to work with advisory on that one too, because they've got an idea of how this should be paid for.
Okay, well, I think that might go back to we have to go back to the engine too, because we never took a vote on that. But is there a second on that?
Second.
All right, so seconded by Jeff. Any further discussion on that? All right. Roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Ratio I.
Hark eye.
Aye.
All
Joe?
right.
All right. So we need to go back to the engine because we didn't take a vote on that. And Chief, for your benefit, I think we're gonna probably time out here for the day and have to come back and have you back for another discussion on your longer term needs, which because I don't think that list is short. So on the engine, I think we've heard the chief's request. We have a 20-year-old engine sitting in the station. The question that didn't come up that I just want to make sure everyone's aware of, I think they're already running pretty lean with 2 pumpers. Most other towns around us, even smaller ones, have 3 or more. Not saying that that's where I want to go. I'm just saying that if we are going to rely on 2 pumpers, we need to make sure that they are operational. And I know, right now when the new one goes out for service, I think it was out last week, I think you mentioned, Chief, right, for something, we're all of us are relying on a 20-year-old engine to show up, and that's the only thing that works before mutual aid arrives. So I am fully supportive of having this on the spring. The goal is to fund this out of the ambulance fund. I do think there needs to be some work and diligence around that with Mark and Brian. Make sure that we can fund it out of the ambulance fund for the next 10 years of a bond. But I would also like, and I'm probably going to put this forward as 2 motions, but I want everyone to be aware of where at least I'm at in my head is I would like this committee to formally request that the BOS, and I think Lisa Marty's been dealing with this on the pilot, is the pilot payments, which are the payments from some of the schools and other nonprofits in town.
Yep.
They've been paying $10,000 a year on the ladder truck. That 10 years expires this year. So I think from a funding mechanism, and given that they have very publicly noted that they like to support items that they can, tie into, like, real life items that they can tie into as opposed to just cutting a check. I would like to, I'm going to kind of do 2 motions. 1, to support funding it out of the ambulance fund and putting it forward on the Springtown meeting. But 2, asking, given that we have a year and a half until this thing actually is going to have a payment due, and it shows up on our doorstep, that we ask Marty, or whoever the BOS rep is, to approach the schools about their desire or any intent to continue their pilot payments, but have it be towards this new pumper, which is engine 22, as opposed to the tower.
I really would prefer we postpone that motion. There's a lot to be talked about there. I think all we got to do today is decide we think we need the pumper truck on the next ATM warrant. And then let's have a more robust discussion about where to put it. Right now, I agree it's in the ambulance fund as far as the debt service, and debt service doesn't start till next year, or fiscal year 22. But I don't think we should weigh in on what Mr. Healy's doing right now with the schools. I think he's got a plan. He's executing the plan, and I think we need to go slow as far as trying to impact that yet. I think we may get there, but I don't think we should do it today.
So is your vote going to change though if we can't fund this out of the ambulance fund? Then it hits the tax rate.
No, if we need it, we need it. And I'm separating the ambulance fund from pilot, Jason, just so you know. I think those are 2 real different discussions.
Agreed.
So I'm much more supportive of the ambulance fund piece of your motion than I am the pilot piece of it. But I still think the discussion about how to pay for this is just is a separate discussion. Andrew Pfaff works at Santander has got a leasing group that takes advantage of a federal program that gives them a credit for leasing to municipalities. So we know that,
Well, Kathy, we can't be bringing private business into.
No, I'm not bringing private business. I'm just saying there are ways to fund things that we haven't even gotten to. So I think that's a whole separate discussion. I think we got to decide what we need first, and then we will talk about where to put it. And we'll have to obviously deal with the things that are going to go in the first town meeting quickly as far as where we put it.
Okay, so then I will motion that we accept the chief's request for a new engine 22 as part of the spring 2020 town meeting to be sourced through the ambulance fund. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion on that?
My only question is, maybe for Brian, is can you do leasing through the ambulance fund? So I guess it would just be a different debt service through a leasing company versus.
Why not?
Yeah, you could. You just have to make sure the funding's available. And I think as Jason referenced, that's going to be a conversation
Yeah.
we're going to have.
Okay. Then I'm good.
All right, any further discussion? All right, roll call vote, Malinowski, aye.
Ratio I.
Half eye.
Palmer, aye.
Cook, aye.
All right, so that passes unanimously. Kathy, I will take your advice on the pilot, but I am still gonna go talk to Marty then. Because I think it is something that needs to be considered, given that that payment is expiring and how well they have supported public safety. They each made donations, I believe, as part of the public safety building. They've all made donations as part of the truck. I think if we can latch onto something, and I get that there's longer term plans, if we can latch onto something that they're willing to support, I think we'd be foolish to just kind of wait, let time pass, especially given what the town's looking at ahead.
More to come.
Yeah, okay. So Chief, I think what we're gonna do is I will connect with you offline and see when you can come back on your broader plan. Because in the interest of us wrapping up, we do need to go through some other just quick items on other departments and call it a wraps for the day. So unless anyone has any parting words for the chief, we will excuse him and thank him for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a safe day.
Thanks, Chief.
You too.
Bye-bye.
All right. So I'm very cognizant of time. Unless Mark or Brian scream at me, I think what I'm gonna do is just go through the facilities item that we talked through last week on the FY20 capital plan, take a formal position on those, and then given that Karen's coming next week, vote on the DPW items next week. I know BOS has a meeting tomorrow night where they're gonna start to see what various iterations of the budget looks like, but given that town meeting is not until June, I'm hoping I can buy another week, just A, due to time, and B, to give Karen the same chance that obviously each of the other department heads have gotten on their FY20 capital items. Does that sound okay, Mark or Brian?
Yeah, I think that's okay, Jason. So on Tuesday night, we're gonna kind of give a broad brush to the Board of Selectmen. The board had asked for coming in with 2% tax increase budgets and 0% tax increase budgets. And we just want to give the board kind of an idea where things are right now. We've got to put together some things. I think some departments did I guess, a little more soul searching than others. And so we've got to take a look at what those mean. And so, yeah, I think if you buy another week, Selectmen are going to have some special meetings over the course of the next couple of weeks. We really have about 4 weeks to get this new budget all set and try to get everybody on the same page, you know, if town meeting is going to be June 13th.
Kathy, can I just ask Jason, Kathy, when is advisory's next meeting?
Next Tuesday.
Same time as the selectmen?
No, I have asked people what works given this strange whirlwind right now. No, in fact, it won't be on purpose. So I hope we can do it during the day.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we have, other than DPW facilities, are the facilities and school are the only other ones with items on here. I'm going to start with facilities for FY20. So there's 4 items that are still being recommended. One is the annual maintenance fund, which is what they use to make ongoing maintenance throughout the year. 2 items related to the library, one for the boiler, one for the EMS, which John Parent talked about last year. And then down under fall, there's the Corderville Hall building additions, renovation, system upgrades. And as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, obviously Assabet, who would be doing a lot of the work, isn't available until 2021. So we don't even have to, I think putting forward a funding request on that, especially in the spring, makes no sense. But what I would like to do is bring the 25,000 that's listed down under fall up to the spring to allow them to add a bathroom with our town's maintenance folks while that building is shut down to accommodate their immediate needs, and then allow us time to continue to analyze Corderville Hall for longer term viability and what that space should be used for in conjunction with the other buildings in town. So what the motion is going to be is to support facilities, the annual building maintenance fund, both library items, and moving Corderville Hall bathroom renovations up with no anticipation of anything for the fall unless something comes out of our due diligence here over the next couple months. So I'll move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or clarification?
Where did the number come from?
My
The
question.
25,000?
Mhm.
John, that's what John Parent has defined as what he can do with both his team and obviously anyone they'd have to hire in terms of like a plumber to do that in the short term.
So 25K would add a whole new bathroom?
That's my understanding. And that's their biggest need, from what I understand as well. I mean, they'd love the extra space, but they can't use it, unfortunately.
There's
Right now.
no doubt they need a bathroom. That is very clear.
So I think that's as much as obviously I'm sure they don't want to see the project further delayed. Unfortunately, with reality of who is going to be doing the work and trying to keeping the cost there in check. Obviously, it wasn't just a financial consideration. It also had to deal with scope of that building project and making sure they don't trip certain building code thresholds that would greatly escalate the cost.
I don't think that timetable's moved from what we were told. So I don't think it's moved at all. We always thought it was going to be then. So that's good.
But it means that you don't need funding this year.
No, and we
Or
didn't. We
much
knew we
bigger.
didn't before. Bill Harrington had said he was fine moving it when he came in front of Board of Selectmen in February. So I'm not sure what changed his mind when he met.
Yeah, but Kathy, the key thing here is this is going to take out any consideration of anything for the fall unless the committee, as part of our work, comes back and says we support that in the fall, doing something on that. Because you don't need the funding until fall of 2021. So we wouldn't be acting on anything until the annual town meeting in April of 2020 or March of 2021.
Totally agree. All I'm trying to say is
Pushing
we'd
into the
already
FY22
agreed
budget.
with that. So this is nothing new. This is what we'd already agreed to move it. So that's fine.
But that's not how it had been carried on the recommendations. Like you can see on the sheet that's in the packet, it had always been carried as a fall item. What we're doing now is we're striking it completely from the fall, moving it to the spring and only making it 25,000. I don't remember, it used to be 375,000. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page before we vote.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense, Kathy?
It does. It was always going to be bonded, so it didn't have any effect on the fiscal year 21 budget anyway. So it's all fine. All fine.
Yeah. Okay. So
All fine.
there's a motion on the table to move the 25 up to the spring and then support the other items that are already scheduled for the spring. It's been seconded. Any further discussion? All right. Do a roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Russia, aye.
Pfaff, aye.
Park eye.
Cook eye.
All right. Got everyone there. So that passes unanimously. So then, Mark or Brian, can you just speak to the school fin boiler replacement, given I don't know when we're going to have them and I don't want to delay anything there, but it says bond likely to be postponed. What does that mean?
So Jason, I've had some conversations with the superintendent and he feels that given the climate that we're in, plus he feels that we may be able to get, at least another, 3, 4, 5 years potentially out of that boiler. It's in good, it's in fairly good condition. Doesn't appear that there's going to be any maintenance issues that we can foresee. And his other concern is that in this SBA program, the pricing that they give you and everything in that, yes, you're getting, 36% of it reimbursed by the state, but it appears that some of that pricing that we're getting is really marked up So the price is really marked up and then they're paying a portion of it. So at the end of the day, I think the superintendent is still exploring whether, if we put this off for a little bit, we may be able to get a better deal doing it without the SBA.
Okay, so no action required from us, and you likely think that's coming out of any recommendations
I
that
think, yes.
BOS or advisory will be considering?
Yeah, I'd like something formal from the school, but that's the last conversation that I had with Greg probably a week or two ago.
Okay.
But
so-
Mark, when Greg came in front of advisory, they were adamant it needed to be done in the summer because of the shape it was in.
I understand, Kathy. That's the conversation I've had with him recently.
Yeah, Kathy, I had the same question as you, that I thought it was urgent and it needed to take place this summer. But obviously,
so-
things change.
So Mark, can you try to get clarity from him prior to our meeting next week? I'm sure the committee would be welcome to vet and discuss it, but obviously I think it would be premature to support it, and we'd be just talking in circles here if we continue the discussion on it, right? Given it seems a little inconsistent with the messaging. The two boards got.
Yeah, let me get clarification on that, Jason, and if he's available, I'll see if Greg could pop into your meeting next week.
Okay, if not, just an email or something that we can consider in advance.
Okay.
Okay. And then the only thing, it's under DPW, but I think, Mark, I don't know what department will fall under now, is this transfer station study, 35,000. I think Mark is planning to put that forward. It's actually going to be budget for this committee. I think he indicated that on last week's discussion. So we'll be able to use it for transfer station, but other engineering type items that may be required as we formulate kind of our report here for the boards in the fall. And come up with our ultimate plan. So if we have to go have a professional look at a building and provide recommendations, we'd be able to access that budget and not have it, okay, I guess, say allocated just to transfer station. Although I think we'll be spending something on that, just a matter of whether we need the full amount. So I don't think that falls under DPW per se, but I want everyone to be aware of that.
That's excellent.
What is the transfer station study specifically targeting?
Well, it's gonna be more broad than that, but I think when Karen comes next week, we need to discuss the future of the town's crash operations in general, because there's some significant capital forecasted for there. So just coming up with a recommendation on whether undertaking that capital is the right way, or whether there needs to be a fundamental shift in the operations. All right, so next week is 7:30 p.m. Karen will be joining us from DPW to talk through exactly Joe's question. I am going to add, and hopefully we'll have time for it, a discussion of ambulance fund, but also potentially recreation as fund. I'm going to have it on the agenda, just talking about how they're funding capital items through there that aren't coming before a town meeting or this committee, including an expense that I found out about from last week. That they funded. So just thinking through if we can't help to tighten up that process.
Who found out?
Well, they approved a playground behind town hall last week out of that fund. So it's not on the agenda, so I don't want to go any further. But I think we should understand what the capital parameters are of that fund. And just like ambulance fund, like we had a good conversation with the chief today about the needs that he has, right? And then thinking through how we're accessing different funds, right? I think goes, Canley, some of your questions around the Harvard funds, Kathy, too, right? Is, if there are town funds that are under town control, what purview does this committee have or not have? And do we have recommendations on where we should be playing, a bigger role, or maybe it's status quo, depending upon obviously everything, that we're all dealing with as a town. Because I think there's ways to work through this to minimize the impact on taxpayers, et cetera. All right. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second,
Roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Ratio I.
FI.
Mark, aye.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.